Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to another edition of Canada Talks. I'm your host, Bhagwant Singh Virk, and I'm joined in the studio by my friend, colleague, and fellow co-host, Martin Singh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Paji, as always, pleasure to be back again.
Paji, it's that time of, not year, doesn't happen yearly, but it's...
Almost.
Almost.
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years. It's that time when we turn on the TV and instead of watching Canadian TV, which, I mean, we'll maybe have a show about that one day, but...
I'm not sure I watch Canadian TV anymore, to be blunt, or any TV for that matter.
And that might be why we have the show. Right? We end up watching American TV or US TVs.
Or at least US election results, as it were.
And US election results, the midterms have just taken place.
Yeah.
Right. And, well, if you can give, I mean, I being sort of grown up in the Westminster system, this is the same system here in Canada as in the UK. Some of this stuff does confuse me, Senate and Congress. I mean, I got a general gist, but I sometimes wonder what the whole... What is it all about? That's just me. There are going to be those viewers who understand it, but there's going to be a lot of viewers like me who don't understand it 100% either, right? But especially where SIKH Channel sort of reaches. So, US elections, what's happened?
So what goes on here? It's so very fascinating as compared to our own system. Because in our own system, generally speaking, at the federal level, we have election maybe every 4 or 5 years, and here in Canada, we change prime ministers maybe once every 10 years. You guys do it once every 10 weeks, at least these days in the UK, right?
45 days.
Yeah. Let us test.
What a shambles.
Yeah, but in fairness to our good friends and our brothers and sisters in the UK, you guys more or less follow the same type of timing that we got going on over here. Although I would argue that the quality of the democratic process in the UK is much better than what we have here in Canada.
I have to say that.
Yeah.
It makes exciting TV as well.
Well, exciting TV, but also members of parliament can do things and have their own brain and that sort of thing, But
Canada,
by contrast, we have more of a democratically elected dictatorship that we got going on here, as it were. Nonetheless, at least you got a bit of a spread between elections. In the United States, at least for the House of Representatives, they don't have that at all. They literally go every 2 years. And when you think about how the political cycle works in the United States, like the next presidential election is, 2024, well, folks are effectively campaigning already, which means it's a perpetual campaign. I don't know how they get any work done. Maybe they're spectacularly good or something. I have no idea. But this is where I'm coming to here. Because when we talk about midterms, we might think about, it's halfway through, so maybe it's half the crew. But not with the House of Representatives. All 435 House of Representatives are up for election.
So let's get terminology correct.
Yeah.
That's the Congress, right?
Well, it's part of Congress.
So what is what here? House of Representatives?
Okay, so your House of Representatives are your representatives that are basically done rep by pop, right? So the more populous a state is, or an area, the more representatives that they have. So California will have more than Rhode Island.
Right.
New York will have more than Montana, et cetera, yeah? And the jurisdictions and stuff like that they cover will be correspondingly different in size. I mean, like you have some House of Representatives seats that literally cover half a state, because of the low population base. Like there's one...
So it's a bit like what we have in North America, well, in Canada and in...
Yeah. You have your...
The House of Commons.
You have your ridings and stuff like that, exactly. And then, and so there's 435 in total. And the whole crew are up for election every 2 years. And understand what that means as well, right? For a lot of folks in those elections, they would also have to go through primaries, which would happen in the months prior as well. So a number of them have to go through literally 2 sets of elections every 2 years. That would give me a headache. And then beyond that, you have the Senate. So the Senate, there are 100 senators, and there are only a certain number that come up for election in any year. So in this particular midterm year, it's 35. So there are 35 senators, which means there may be some states that don't have any senators that are coming up for election. And so what it is that the strategies that the Republicans and Democrats employ around House of Representative seats and Senate seats differ substantially, because with the House of Representatives, it's literally the whole country that you got going. And with the Senate, you're focusing on very particular races.
So these Senate and the House of Representatives. So what does Congress mean then? Congress
that's the crew together.
That's
as far as I understand.
Okay,
yeah.
it's like the Parliament.
Yeah.
Which is the House of Lords or the Senate here in Canada.
Yeah.
And House of Commons. Okay, so we got Congress. We have the House of Representatives, all for 435.
Yep.
Up, right? Just like a general election would be.
Yes.
And you had about a third of the.
Just north of a third, yeah.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, there's what happened, and there's what people thought was going to happen.
Yes.
So, historically, normally what happens, if you have a president who's of the same party that controls the House of Representatives, and that's the same party that controls the Senate, typically that president's party in the House of Representatives at least normally takes a kick in the chops. Normally they get struck down, and this is in a substantial way. And this is what was expected here. Republicans, pundits, and people generally were expecting what they call a red wave, because red's the color of the Republicans in the States. Yeah, Democrats are the blue. Yeah, it's entirely confusing.
It's entirely confusing.
Yeah, but nonetheless, that's how they choose to do it, and so there we are.
So just as comparison, where the left-wing parties here actually slightly different in Canada, which the orange is left, but the UK anyway, red is the sort of left of centre and blue is the right of centre party.
Yeah. Now, I mean, in fairness, if we go back far enough in American history, there used to be a time when actually the Republicans were allying with unions, and they were against slavery. I mean, President Lincoln, freed the slaves, and he was a Republican. And now they've switched it on their head to be, the pro-racism party, among other things, right? And that sort of thing. So what it is that, so we have, they were expecting a red wave, and it didn't happen. Now, not as we speak right now, not all of the votes are in for either all of the competitive seats in the House of Representatives or the Senate, but they're now saying that the Republicans are only expecting a slight majority. Now, this is an important thing, because in Canada, if a party had a slight majority, they have the majority, and everything's going to roll the way that they want to roll. In the United States, it's not the case. And so what happens is that inside the Republican Party, within the House of Representatives, there's someone that wants to become the Speaker. And that's a hugely powerful position. So the current Speaker is Nancy Pelosi. And
she's a Democrat.
She is a Democrat, absolutely. Long-term Democrat from California. And what it is that you can say that she's probably number 2 behind the president in terms of power. Now, in terms of power structure, it's the president first, and then, as they say, one heartbeat away would be the Vice President Kamala Harris, who has the deciding vote right now in the Senate. We're going to talk about that in a minute as well. And then it would go to Nancy Pelosi, I believe, if those two somehow disappeared. But in terms of power currently, Speaker of the House of Representatives is your number 2. And so it's an important position. I believe the gentleman who wants it right now, his name is McCarthy. Interestingly, I believe he's also from California, Republican, but he's looking at maybe having some trouble, because there are different caucuses that exist within the Republican group, and they are saying, hey, if you want us to actually support you, you have to give us some concessions up front. Otherwise, we'll run our own candidate, split the Republican vote, and cause you to lose, brother Republican. And then the Democrats will have the Speaker of the House again. It's really, really fascinating, because you'd never get anything like that here in Canada.
Not in Canada.
And now, that being said, though, also, too, the Speaker of the House in Canada doesn't really have any power that I know of. It's very ceremonial. I mean, important position, no doubt, right? But doesn't carry the same kind of power.
So these caucuses that are in the Republican Party, how do they line up?
Well, the one, I mean, as with a lot of things that I find happens in American politics, you hear about not necessarily the biggest ones or the most important ones, but you hear the ones that make the loudest noise. And so it's the Freedom Caucus right now that's making the loudest bunch of noise. And that's the crew with Representative Green, among others, who come out and are, full-blown election deniers. Don't believe in equal rights for everybody, for anybody, for anything. It's your hard right. Like everybody should own a pistol and they should carry it out in the open whenever they walk around, et cetera, et cetera. So they have their own particular agenda.
And they have a constituency of people, obviously, who vote them in.
They absolutely do. There is no doubt. And the caucus is large enough to cause trouble for any particular Republican who wanted to become a speaker and not work with them, to be frank.
Obviously, that's the representatives. What happened is separate. I just want to actually come back to the political implications in a second. What happened in the Senate?
Okay, well, if we can, we're going to just sit on the House of Representatives for a bit, okay?
Sure, go ahead.
So what it is, the red wave didn't happen. And so they're short on their on the numbers that they would need for a strong functioning majority, because there'll be, like, quite unlike what we have here in Canada, but more like what we have actually in the UK. There will be people who will cross the floor on certain votes, meaning that if there's an initiative being put forward by Biden or by the Democrats that benefits a Republican in his or her own state, there's a good chance that they will flip and vote with the government to make it happen. And so it's an important piece, because again, when we talk about majorities, it's not always the case. In addition, it's important for other items, because if the Republicans had full, solid control of the House of Representatives as well as the Senate, you could expect the Republicans to start doing to Joe Biden what the Democrats did to Donald Trump, meaning guarantee there being impeachment hearings, guaranteed, right? They would start investigating Joe Biden's son, who has all kinds of challenges, not least of which, a history of drug addiction and that type of thing, which, shouldn't necessarily be a factor, but the Republicans absolutely would make it a factor. The president's legislative agenda would effectively be stalled. I mean, there's a quote coming from Biden saying that, if the Republicans win both sides of the House, that he would get out a new pen and call it his, what did he call it? No, it's like a pen for his veto pen or something like that, right? For vetoing all the legislation that they would try to bring forward. So it becomes, I wouldn't call it a hung parliament, but it's that type. Yeah, it's that type of a piece, right, where nothing gets done. At least none of the president's agenda gets done. So it's important to make sure that we reflect upon that and that sort of thing. In addition to, not all members of the House of Representatives have been voted in yet. Like, the Republicans don't yet have a majority as we speak currently, and that will become more clear over the next few days.
Senate.
Yeah. All right. So the Senate. Back in the presidential election, you may or may not remember that it went to a runoff vote in Georgia for not one but two senators. Donald Trump had injected himself into that race substantially, and also tried to heavily pressure the Republican government at the state level then, and it will be now, to overturn the results of the presidential vote there. And the knock-on effect of that was that both Senate Republican candidates, who were incumbents, if I remember correctly, lost in 2020. So what's happening right now is that we're at about 48 and 48 in terms of decided races, if I'm not mistaken. And we're waiting on, I believe it's Arizona is one, we're waiting on Nevada, but both of those will probably take, 7 or 8 days more to get sorted. And Georgia, the results are in. The Democrat had the most votes, but the rules in Georgia is that the winner must have greater than 50% of the votes. And so Georgia, for the second time in 2 years, is going to have another runoff election in January. So we might not actually know the full power or what's happening in the Senate until, the second week of January. What happens then, though, is that all the other candidates that shoot up other votes get dropped off the ballot. It's your top two. Like I said, the Democrat, whose name's escaping me right now, unfortunately, I think it's Warnock, is in the lead. And then it's Herschel Walker, who's the hugely famous former pro athlete. I believe he was a football player, huge Trump supporter. People were expecting him to walk away with it, but he didn't. And there's some serious questions as to whether or not he can actually win.
So there's two people I want to ask about who came out of this, and I'll ask, how did the president come out of all of this?
Interesting commentary. So,
what was expected?
So, President Biden, despite Democrat numbers dropping, at least on the House of Representatives side, came out smiling. Because despite the fact that his own personal numbers are low, despite the fact that people have huge concerns about the economy and inflation, he bucked the historic trend. Like literally 6 or 7 presidents before him, and not like that far back, but I mean like every single president in that position for 6 or 7 presidents before him all got kicked in the chops in the midterm elections, and it didn't happen to him. And so it begs the question, why didn't it happen?
Yeah.
And so many things are factoring in there. So one of the factors, Democratic voters were hugely motivated to vote because of the Roe versus Wade overturning in the Supreme Court with respect to pro-choice, pro-life, and access to abortion. It was a significant issue. In addition, there were specific states that had abortion on the ballot. Michigan, California, Kentucky, there were others. When these, what we call down ballot topics or down ballot candidates or issues or whatever it is are present, and it's an issue that's a ballot issue, like we've mentioned before, things on which people want to vote, it drives up voter turnout. And it can drive up voter turnout in an unequal way, meaning in this particular case, it was driving up the turnout on the Democratic side. Yeah, so maybe not a huge big deal in California because a lot of California goes a Democrat already, but it absolutely helped the governor of Michigan hold her spot.
Correct me, and this is what I'm just imagining.
Yeah.
That you have the ballot of the candidates, and then what is it? They're having a ballot about abortion?
Okay, so this goes state by state, and I can't speak to what happens in every single state, but I'll speak to it more generally, all right? What happens is that you have basically a ballot, and on that ballot you would have the option to choose your state senator if the Senate election was up, like was going on in that particular election, because remember, a number of senators weren't, like most senators in fact, weren't up for election in this particular midterm. But if it was, you'd have the state senator, and then you'd have your House representative. You might have your state governor at that point. You may have state Senate representative. You might then have state representative. Also in the United States too, depending on the state, which we never do here in Canada, you can vote for your attorney general. Right? You can vote for judges, right? And then you can also vote on different citizen initiatives. And there's all kinds of rules about how they get on the ballot or not on the ballot or whatever the case may be. So when we talk about this, and it's normally talked about more in a presidential election than in a midterm election, but what they talk about is the down ballot impact of things that are going on at the top. But as much as we talk about the down ballot impact, there can be an up ballot impact as well. This was done years ago. I can't remember the name of the activist within the Republican Party. I can see his face now right in front of me, but it was for George Bush Jr. And what he did for his re-election campaign, although, actually, was it re-election campaign? It could have been his initial election campaign, actually, when he, I think he ran against John McCain in that one. Not John McCain. I forget who it was. Nonetheless, what they did was Republicans made sure to go around to swing states and others and get down ballot issues. And I think it was the same-sex marriage issue at that point. And Republicans were obviously going against it. And so what they did is they used that down ballot issue to draw out their votes to help get their presidential candidate and other candidates more votes at the ballot box. Same deal here with abortion. On the flip side, for the Republicans, you have a situation now where the Republicans have spoken so much about how there's so much fraud in the electoral system.
that people are not voting.
There you go, brother. Republicans are actually, there's a section of the Republican vote that's actually choosing not to come out. I call that poetic justice, but other people, would be certainly disappointed with that in the Republican Party. But it's the chickens coming home to roost, right? They're saying, well, if the whole damn thing's rigged already, why vote? And also too, I mean, voter apathy is huge in democracies generally already, and so it feeds into that as well.
So that's why the Democrats weren't completely wiped out.
Well, I mean, those are parts of the reason. There are certainly other reasons. There's state-level reasons as well. So let's talk about something that was very significant on election night. The Democrats actually picked up a Senate seat that was not Democratic prior. It's the state seat of it's the state Senate seat in Pennsylvania. So there was a Senate position there. The incumbent was not coming back. The incumbent was a Republican. Stepped down, and you had so-called Dr. Oz. You might remember him from television days, Mehmet Oz, so he ran against. And do you know what? Maybe it was the person who beat him. His name was Warnock. I forget. Anyways, running against a Democrat. And he lost. And so that was a Democratic pickup, which was entirely unexpected. And it gives the Democrats breathing space on the remaining Senate seats to try at least get a 50-50 split. Because if the Republicans get a 50-50 split, they're screwed. If the Democrats get a 50-50 split in the Senate, they win. Because in that case, the vice president casts the deciding vote on all Senate votes.
Kamala Harris, and she's a Democrat.
Exactly right.
So Joe Biden came out with a smile.
He absolutely did.
Now, the former president of the United States,
not a smile at all.
Take us through that.
Yeah, so his candidates generally did very poorly. Mehmet Oz, we spoke of already. Herschel Walker in Georgia didn't make it, at least not yet.
And I'm going to speculate. Is because when you're bashing the electoral system, your people are not going to come vote.
Well, there's that. Also, too, part of the challenge is that the people who vote for the candidate in the nomination process, meaning in the electoral primaries, as they call them down in the United States, are very different people than the ones who actually vote in the election proper. So in some primaries, it's restricted. Only Republicans can vote. There'd be other primaries, depending on the state, where Republicans and independents can vote. And then there might be an open primary where anybody could vote for the candidate.
So anyway, coming to the key point, because we only got 3-4 minutes left. What happened to former President Biden, who was, not Biden, Trump, who was eyeing up, or may still be eyeing up 2024.
Okay.
What happened? What happened, and where does this lead?
We want to talk about two people then in this case. President Trump was made weaker by this election overall. His candidates generally didn't do well. One in particular, and I forget her name, she was a state representative, I believe it was the state of California. Super, what they call MAGA, or Make America Great Again fan. She was part of that Freedom Caucus. Lost her seat after just 2 years. She's on track to lose her seat, I should say. I don't think it's been called yet, but she's actually in fact losing, which is surprising, right? Given what has happened there in the past. By contrast, you have the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. He is seen as the most serious potential candidate to run against Donald Trump for the Republican nomination. In his initial election for governor of the state of Florida, he squeaked by. He did not squeak by on midterm night. He blew out Florida. He won it handily. In addition, he won in many places, like parts of Miami-Dade, which are very traditionally Democratic locations. And so his position is seen as very, very strong coming out of midterm elections, and people openly say now he could use this as a platform from which to leverage his ambitions with respect to the presidential nomination.
Politics, there's very few that was love lost between politicians, right? So is the Trump star, as it were, in decline?
I would say marginally, but there won't be any Republicans that will openly oppose him. Because as much as he maybe had difficulty in the general election, you have to get by your primary first to become the candidate. And he has significant control over Republican Party U.S. primaries. And so he's very much an internal power player still, but his ability to assist candidates in winning in general and competitive elections with other parties may be significantly decreased.
So we're sort of really coming up to the end is what's happening and happen. And obviously this is still in flux. I mean, nothing's going to get done, sounds like. No major policy decisions are going to take place in the next 2 years. Or
it really depends. We have to see what flushes out over the next couple of weeks. Senate's particularly important, and we likely won't learn that one until January. So we'll see what happens in January with respect to that. I'm sure we'll talk about it again. And then with respect to the House of Representatives, I would say that we probably need a full 2 weeks to figure out what exactly is going to happen with that crew. Once we get those two bits sewn up, then we'll be able to say, where are we going with respect to things in the future. And the implications are not just in America. There were a number of Republicans who were talking about the need to cut funding to Ukraine in the Ukraine-Russian war. And so there's an international aspect of this too that we may revisit in a future show.
But on that note, we have to thank you once again for your insights on the U.S. elections, the midterm elections. And needless to say, we'd wish our viewers a happy and safe week.
Well, and if I can add something in here too, depending on when the show gets done, shout out to our American brothers and sisters down south for American Thanksgiving, actually.
Ah, yes. When is that?
I know when ours is in Canada, it's the second weekend in October. I think theirs is the third weekend in November, I think so, right? Because then they have like Black Friday or whatever it is when all the folks go shopping across the border and that sort of thing. Yeah. But I'm not exactly sure, but I know it comes around this time of year.
So for those in the US who are watching, you see two people who know nothing about the US.
Well, we know about that they have a Thanksgiving. We just don't know the exact date because we don't get the day off.
And I never knew what Thanksgiving was in the UK, but maybe we'll talk about that at some point, actually.
For sure that.
But till next time,
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.